Mia, a young entrepreneur in a bustling city, has some problems. She really needs a better way to manage her finances. And she thinks of an app that could help her with that. So she comes up with a beautiful design and the functionality that such an app should have. At the end, she has her beautiful app. And now she can not only check her bank account, but she can also track all of her transactions and optimize her spending. So while this was a nice little touching story and the UI that she was working on looked pretty nice and all, we're not there yet. We're going to start with something quite simple. We're just going to build a simplistic bank details or bank account program, and therefore we're going to use a bunch of concepts that we have used before. We're going to use classes, we're going to use functions, and then we're going to use constructors, as well as if statements and a bunch more. All right, so at the end of this little project, I'll also have a challenge for you, but let's start with this project first. Therefore, I am going to create a new project, and this new project will also have no activity. I'm going to click finish. I'm going to call this one Bank Account App or program. Let's call it program because it's not really like an app in the sense of an Android app. And then once we have that, let's click finish. So while it is loading, let's think about what we need with our bank account. So our bank account needs to have a account holder and it needs a balance. And because our bank wants to store multiple bank accounts or have multiple bank accounts, it needs to have that as a separate instance. So the thing is, we could be able of extending that bank account. Maybe later we want to have more details about it, such as transactions, which could be a list of individual transactions. Then there could be all kinds of stuff like messages that that bank account has stored and so forth. So if we were to just use a list, that would limit us. But then if we use a bank account class, we have the option of having multiple different data types as well as modifying it after the fact. So keeping up with the requirements of our banks. All right, so let's go ahead and go into our Kotlin Java. Let's create a new Kotlin class file. And I'm going to call this one bank main. This will just be a file. This will be the starting point of our bank. So fun main, and this will just be the entry point of our application because it still will be a console application. And tomorrow we will then finally start building actual Android apps. So as I said, we would need a new class. So let's go ahead and create a new class in here as well. And I'm going to call this one bank account. All right. And as I said, this class bank account will require certain information, and therefore I'm going to create a constructor here where I create some properties. And the properties that I was talking about was the account holder, which was of type string, and the balance that I'm going to start with. Obviously, we could extend that later on, but these two should be fine for now. And I'm going to use a double for the balance because the balance isn't the whole number. It could be $2,000.03, for example. Okay, so what are the features that we want to have in such a bank account? So what could be the, let's say, behavior that such a bank account can bring to us? Well, we can deposit money. So let's deposit. And what do we want to deposit? Well, an amount. So we need to pass how much we want to deposit. Another function could be to withdraw money. So withdraw also an amount that would be of type double. And then we could display our transactions. So display transaction history would be another function. So this one doesn't need additional information. It's just going to display the transaction history directly. So the deposit function allows us to put money into our account. The withdraw function allows us to take money out of our account. And then finally, the display transactions history will show all of the transactions that we had. So we will need to store all of our withdrawing and depositing. We want to store that in the list. Let's directly also create a variable in here that will contain the transaction history. So private val transaction history. So this will be a mutable list of strings. So at this point, I don't have any content inside of that list, which is why I need to define of what type the list is going to be. Otherwise, I could obviously also start with an empty string and then I wouldn't need the string keyword here. But if I don't define the data type by adding items into that list, the list wouldn't know of which type it is, which is why we manually define it's of type string, which is why we use these brackets here. So this list is going to be private because this private keyword basically changes the accessibility of this variable. We saw that earlier when we were working with classes, because if we were to create an object of our bank account, so let's say we create Dennis's bank account, and that would be a bank account object. Now we need to add the holder as well as, what was it? The other item, the balance. Let's say I have 1,343 point, and actually it should be a Boolean like this. So this is the amount of dollars that I have. So now I have created this Dennis's bank account, and from here I can access Dennis's bank account dot account holder. So I can print out who the account holder of this account is. All right, and let me run that real quick so that we can actually see what I mean with this. So we can see that it says Dennis Panuta, and I had to run twice, as it always is when we create a new project, that we get this error first, but then it works. So I can access account holder, but I cannot access transaction history because this variable now is not accessible to me from outside of the bank account class, as it is private. So if I were to access Dennis's account, you can see the only variables that I get is account holder and balance. So if I were to make this public by not adding anything in there, then I can access the transaction history. You see, suddenly I can access it from outside. But what I want to do is I want to save the account history. I want to make sure that it's secure inside of only the bank account. So it cannot be accessed from the outside. Only functions inside of our bank account class can actually access it. Okay, so that's what we do with this private. We make sure it's only visible inside of this class, and only functions in the class can actually work with it. And that's what this display transaction history function will be for, where it actually does the logic, or it has implemented the logic directly in the class of how to display the transaction history instead of actively accessing the transaction history from from outside. So for example, from our bank main class. And we can still get the data displayed, but we cannot modify and access the data directly. Okay, so that's the difference, what we have here. Okay, and I would say before we go into the implementation of all of that, we have a quick break because otherwise the video would just be too long. So we learned two things in this video. First of all, that we can define the type of a list directly when setting up the list without having any values. So Kotlin cannot infer what type the list should be of. We have to manually say what the list is of what kind of items the list is. And we also learned that there is this keyword private, which hides or makes variables inaccessible from outside of the given class that we create the variable in. Okay, so that's it for this video. See you in the next one.